Non-family members aren't allowed to sit, therefore you will have to stand. There wasn't a seat for me in the reserved area when I went to a restaurant to celebrate my grandson John's milestone. Looking from one relative to another who had arrived simultaneously, my oldest son, Ryan's wife Katie, said something startling. I was angry at first, but my brother Jonathan's tap on my shoulder made me feel better. It was then that I realized, I guess we should head home then. I was surprised to hear that everyone said yes right away, so we had to go right away. I disregarded the yells and the sound of crashing dishes behind us and made my way home, where I immediately took action. My name is Donna, and I work in an office for a firm that owns and operates several restaurants. I am 40 years old. Despite my formal job description as a shop advisor, I work from home most of the time because of a congenital leg impairment. I walk with a cane rather than a wheelchair, so I'm cautious while using subways in overcrowded downtown areas. I am ashamed to say that, although I know it's not ideal, I don't frequently go to the restaurants my company owns. My life has seemed dull since I lost my husband David to sickness 2 years ago. I gave my son and his wife my house 3 years ago, and I now live alone in a smaller apartment furnished by my brother Jonathan. People frequently inquire as to whether I'm lonely, but I actually like my independence more than being alone. My tense relationship with Katie, my son's wife, is partially to blame. Katie is 24, 8 years younger than my son Ryan. She was well liked as a college model and was elegant and gorgeous. She had many TV appearances while attending a prominent institution, where she was predicted to become a news reporter and be dubbed Miss Institution. But in the summer of her junior year, she became pregnant with Ryan's kid, which resulted in a shotgun marriage. She had originally taken a leave of absence from college, intending to return after giving birth, but she had to drop out due to severe morning sickness and failing health. Katie decided to drop out of school because she was afraid that her beauty would be destroyed, and she didn't want to be seen in public. Katie started acting aggressively toward my son Ryan during this period, her physical condition making her angry. "Mom, please." Katie simply yells and rejects everything, no matter what I do, thinking it's for the best. The filthy state of the house is harmful to the unborn child's surroundings. Ryan was pleading, "I need your help." Thus, my husband and I decided to move into the spacious condominium we had purchased and live there with our son and his wife until our deaths. But living with Katie's arrogant attitude and treatment of me like a servant proved to be difficult. "Hurry up and bring my smoothie and crackers to bed. I can't wait. Haven't I told you many times how sick I feel from morning sickness if I wake up empty-handed?" She would scream. She would scream, "Why are you washing my clothes with your old granny clothes?" when she wasn't screaming about that. "No matter how costly the fabric softener is, my clothing will still smell like the old hag." When Ryan saw enough, he would severely reprimand her. Is it reasonable in this house to harass a pregnant woman? Even when David suggested that Ryan have a conversation with her, she would just lash out. "Nothing makes sense to Katie at the moment, so it's impossible." He would laugh it off and say, "I wish you could just deal with it, Mom." Katie's conduct was annoying, but we had no choice but to put up with it because she was pregnant. Perhaps David could have stood up to Katie and Ryan more firmly if he had been his normal self. However, looking back, David's body was most likely already slowly being destroyed by illness at that point. David's study and living room were supposed to be his retreats from his job, but Katie had filled both with her beauty products and left little room for him to unwind. He was so exhausted that even when he attempted to relax in the enormous bathtub we had ordered, he was met with the comment, "Taking a bath with that old guy gives me the chills. Simply take a shower in the stall instead." David concluded it was preferable to put up with the verbal abuse himself despite it, noting, "Arguing with those two just tires me out more." Instead of taking a moment to ponder, Katie and Ryan became even more despotic upon witnessing David's attitude. We had to put up with their conduct, even while I frantically managed the domestic tasks, dragging my ill leg around. They ignored it. She pointed at me and insulted me to the visiting beautician, saying, "No matter how old I get, I never want to end up like that disgraceful old hag." The beautician was so disgusted by their remarks that she was at a loss for words, yet she was unaffected. A younger servant would have been ideal, but you are aware of how difficult it is to get a trustworthy person these days. "So, we made a settlement," she said. Despite these remarks, I silently carried out my tasks while feeling resentful of Katie and Ryan and experiencing leg pain. Katie's due date approached, and as these days passed, she gave birth to a healthy child. David, who was holding John, his first grandchild, started to cry a little when the small hand clamped down on his finger. When I saw this, I almost started crying. The baby's lovely grin made me want to let go of all my grudges and bad emotions. However, that notion was fleeting as I abruptly learned that David had passed out at work. In a panic, I tried calling Ryan on his cell phone and left without a response before racing to the hospital. I reluctantly requested that the business get in touch with him on his company-issued cell phone, but I received no answer. I called Katie's cell phone, hoping to get David to see his grandson John if nothing else. I requested that she take John to the hospital. "It's impossible. I'm in the middle of getting my hair done at the salon," she joked. "Then I'm going to go to the salon to pick up John myself," I said. "Do you really think I'd leave a baby to an old woman who can barely walk with a cane?" She hung up the phone after that. Nevertheless, I persisted in phoning Katie's and Ryan's cell phones. But in the middle of all of this, the light in the operating room went out, and the doctor emerged to tell me that David had died. I have no recollection of the period that followed. I just remember the image seeming foggy, like it was seen through frosted glass. It was in this fog that, following the burial, I had the illness. With a theatrical flourish, "Katie, the baby might catch it, which would be terrible," she ordered me out of the home. My body was weak from sickness and cough, and my mind was already ruined by David's abrupt departure, so I didn't have the energy to argue with a distraught Katie. I stumbled out of the room, barely managed to get dressed, and fell at the elevator hall's entrance. Thank goodness the worker phoned for help since I was taken to the hospital right away. The doctors said I was close to contracting pneumonia. After learning about my illness, my brother and his wife, as well as my nephew Peter, took care of everything later. There's no need to attend the hospital. Ryan and Katie stated, "She's been admitted, she's safe, and it would be horrible if the baby caught something." And they didn't even bother to come to see me. My nephew and his wife were offended by their behavior and recommended that I remain with them for a time rather than go back to the condo, where Katie would only take advantage of me once more. Yes, going back to the condo would mean living like a servant before I'd even regained my strength. My nephew's offer was very appreciated, but staying at my brother Jonathan's home, where my sister-in-law's parents resided, was not an option because of worries about infection control. I decided to take them up on their gracious offer, but not before going back to the condo to get David's old pictures and personal belongings. Olivia, the wife of my nephew Peter, chose to accompany me since she was concerned about the circumstances. It had been approximately a month since our last visit, and we discovered the condominium was in bad condition. "What's the fuss about? There's a mountain of filthy glasses and plates, and the garbage disposal is jammed." "What an awful stench," Olivia said. The state of the restrooms and living room was equally bad, with delivery food containers strewn all over the place. I questioned how they could bring up a child in such a mess. Olivia and I were stunned as Katie returned with a few pals, seemingly intoxicated despite the late hour of 2:07 p.m. Katie seemed astonished for a second when she saw us standing in the living room that had been converted into a dump, but she soon put on her typical smug expression and remarked, "So, you're finally back. Now get to work cleaning this place. The old hag slacked off, which is why everything got filthy. Olivia felt offended by this brashness. How dare you speak to Ryan's mom like that after all she has done for you? She hurriedly walked up to Katie. And you simply ejected her as soon as she contracted the flu? Katie, though, and her pals simply shrugged it off. Friends of unreasonable individuals are naturally irrational themselves. Birds of a feather flock together. Then they remarked, as though they had a brilliant idea, "Why don't you just go now? This property will eventually pass to Ryan by inheritance. The elderly hag merely needs to return to her parents' home." As Olivia grew even angrier, she retorted sharply. Despite their ridiculous actions, I managed to maintain my composure. The attempt to force me out by Katie and the others was unavoidable. I contacted Peter for assistance since there was no reason for me to continue hanging around with these awful folks. That day, we were able to remove every item of mine that had sentimental significance. Nevertheless, I recalled deciding that this house would be my final resting place when I took my final glance at the condominium. My heart was touched by David's beaming expression when we came to that choice. I was positive that David would understand this choice. After that, I resumed my career, which had been on hold since before David's death, and moved into a condominium close to my parents' house that Jonathan had arranged for me. In addition, I started living with a rescue cat that I had acquired after David's allergies prevented me from having one earlier. Ryan and I share an office, but we barely ever speak, although we are employed by the same firm. Ryan did, however, send me an odd note one day. I scanned the note, curious about this unexpected communication. It concerned organizing John's milestone celebration, which will take place this coming weekend at a restaurant. Katie seems to have invited quite a few people, including her parents, relatives, and friends. He wanted to invite me and the family, saying, "Something will be off if no one from our side of the family attends." "Why don't you ask David's side of the family then?" I recommended. However, it appears they had already declined. David's family is indeed located quite a distance away, and getting back there is difficult. And it's Friday already, so there's a short time to get ready to leave the house. It makes sense why they declined. Ryan sensed my uncertainty and replied, "I'm sorry for everything that's happened," just as I was ready to decline again. "Could you please take John's needs into consideration?" John was innocent, even if I was furious at Ryan and Katie. I didn't want to ruin the celebration of John's birth, because I remembered how joyful David was about it. I thought about it for a while before deciding to go, and I even wrote Ryan a note stating as much. That day, my uncle and aunt, their kids, my brother and his wife, my nephew and his wife, and other family members gathered in front of the eatery. Olivia said, "I'm here today not for that couple, but for Donna." We were escorted to the biggest area in the restaurant, which had low tables and chairs, while they tried to calm her down. I have mobility limitations, therefore it would be tough for me to sit down in this arrangement. Considering this, I requested a little higher chair from the staff member who had checked us in. Katie, on the other hand, forcefully interrupted, crossing her arms, saying, "There's no extra seat, so just stand." I was more surprised than infuriated to see Katie's smug expression. I couldn't understand how she could still be so cruel. "Shall we go back home then?" I hurriedly cried out to my standing family. "Yes," was the response they all gave without thinking. This upset Katie's side of the visitors. Katie's parents parted the gathering and quickly scolded Katie, as well as myself, my brother, and his wife. Katie, however, was insulted in front of her family and friends, which infuriated her. She then began tossing plates, vases, and framed photos, whatever she could find. The room erupted in screams and yells and the sound of crashing objects, but we ignored everything and left. After the family and I had left the restaurant, Jonathan and I made the decision to have a strategy meeting to plan the next steps. My grandpa founded the business where I, the late David, and Ryan were employed. More than half of the shares in this family-run company are owned by our relatives, and my own brother Jonathan is presently the CEO. After graduating from college, David, who had been Jonathan's close buddy, agreed to join the firm at Jonathan's request. Ryan is his son from a marriage to a clerk there. However, when Ryan was in the 7th grade, his wife passed suddenly following an extended illness. Seeing David balancing his job and family life on his own, Jonathan advised us to get married. Jonathan was presumably worried about my future because of my disability and lack of social support. David's statements: "I'm a single father with a child, but I intend to take good care of you," won me over after I was first apprehensive. "Would you like to join our family?" Ryan, my stepson, was not at all hostile or affectionate toward me, his new stepmother. I decided to be the best stepmother I could be, even though I thought it was ridiculous to expect more from Ryan so soon after his mother passed away. Ryan's statement, "I want to work at the same company as Dad and Mom," just before he was about to graduate from college, brought me to tears. But this quiet time came to an end when Ryan and Katie got married hurriedly. After a while, I was unable to put up with Katie's controlling ways, so I made the decision to have Ryan have a serious conversation with his wife. I waited for Ryan in the company's parking lot. The next thing I saw, though, was Ryan, not realizing I was just a few pillars away, with his arm around a married coworker. They were becoming too close. After she was sufficiently shocked, she asked him, "What if someone catches us here? We would both be let go." "I won't make such a mistake, and even if the relationship gets exposed, the company can't fire me," he confidently said. "I am the president's step-nephew, after all." Ryan went on, not realizing how surprised I was. "My stepmother is the company's senior vice president and the granddaughter of the founder, but my true mom was simply a country girl. She therefore has a sizable portion of the assets and stocks. I will have all of that once she dies away." Then he took the woman and drove off. I couldn't believe what I'd heard and went home, reliving Ryan's comments in my mind, overwhelmed. I gradually realized why Ryan had never chastised Katie and why she was usually speaking so contemptuously about me. It was similar to removing layers to expose reality. Katie was probably given a similar excuse when they first got married. After all, they see me as nothing more than a tool to be used as they want until they get the estate, that is, Ryan and the unborn grandchild as well. I'm simply their stepmother. They feel free to treat me with contempt since we are all strangers to one another. However, neither Katie nor Ryan are aware of this fact. Ryan and I haven't actually undergone an adoption procedure. Ryan is not entitled to receive my inheritance. He is only David's stepchild legally. Ryan is essentially Jonathan's step-nephew in his role as CEO, if that. After coming to terms with the shock, I spoke with Philip, Peter, and Olivia right away. I acted on their advice and went to the municipal hall to be sure that no adoption could happen without permission. Furthermore, as a contingency plan, I had made arrangements to assign a lawyer to handle my personal assets, which was almost finished at the time of David's death. David's own inheritance was limited to savings and life insurance, which I quickly renounced, having been mostly consumed by the illness of his first wife. The condo was never included in the estate in the first place, which is why it was not brought up during the inheritance negotiations. Still, it's quite terrifying how greed can make people blind. After I rejected the inheritance, Ryan and Katie undoubtedly hurried to force me out since they believed the condominium belonged to David. I didn't simply back down because I wasn't feeling well. I also did it out of sympathy for little John and didn't want to significantly disturb his living arrangements. But I've had enough this time. I immediately started the eviction procedure with my lawyer because my original plan was to apply for an eviction due to the unauthorized occupation of the condo during the milestone celebration. Katie's parents hauled their daughter over to the business to make amends. Katie told us not to go because she needed to get along with her husband's family and that Ryan's family would handle the delivery and everything since there would be an heir, and we believed her. This was the last thing we knew had happened. We sincerely apologize. They repeatedly apologized as soon as they were led into the living room, but it was too late to make apologies. When Ryan heard the disturbance, he too started to flee. I didn't realize that my wife could be that irrational. I sincerely apologized to Mom for what I did, but he told Katie, "We're getting a divorce," as she began to cry. "Grab the child and depart from that apartment building." His nearly savage expression sent chills down my spine. Observing my response, Jonathan cast a chilly glance at Ryan and remarked, "You are aware that the store is a link in our company's network, correct? You'll both be footing the bill, given the mess you've caused. As for you, stay at home until you get an official call from the company," she said, shoving everyone from the reception area with firmness. Following the milestone celebration event, my brother Jonathan started making plans to terminate Ryan, contacting the company's legal advisor. Not only is Katie's shameful behavior disgusting, but Ryan's carelessness in allowing her to run wild is just as bad, he angrily said. They even demolished store furnishings and fittings. It seems sensible to fire him, right? He was insistent at first about terminating him right away, but the other executives helped him to relax by pointing out that an irrational disciplinary discharge may hurt us in court. We went to a law company whose competent attorneys we had been told about. They performed a fantastic job presenting unquestionable proof that was more than enough to terminate Ryan, living up to their reputation. Ryan was called into the top office conference room 1 week after his home detention was temporarily lifted. Maybe he had some insider information, but he appeared ready for his firing. Even with a lawyer beside him, the sheer volume of people blew him away. "It goes without saying why we've called you here today," said Jonathan, who was seated in the middle of the board. Ryan clenched his hands and braced himself, saying, "Your dismissal has been decided." "Mr. Ryan Miller, you are hereby rejected," Jonathan read to Ryan in his capacity as president. Right away, his attorney protested. "My client agrees to the troubles with his stepmother, Donna, but insists that connecting this to his dismissal is an unfair end," a voice said. Ryan, who was sitting next to him, appeared happy and nodded after the attorney had spoken. "My ex-wife's harshness at the recent milestone celebration is unacceptable, but it is a private matter," he protested. "Isn't it wrong to fire me over it?" With a smug expression, he said, "I'm also prepared to disclose this as harassment to the media if necessary," before noticeably setting a voice recorder on the desk. Upon hearing this, Ryan proceeded, assuming the quiet of Jonathan and the other executives as success, saying, "You know the public outrage against corporations who break compliance, right?" He prodded again. "Are you sure you want to fire me knowing what would happen?" Ryan's attorney seemed puzzled at this moment, not displaying the typical symptoms of stress, but rather a faint smile. However, Ryan, ever so self-assured, was blind to it. Then, speaking in a voice lower than normal, Jonathan questioned, "Oh, so you wish to continue working with us? That pass is difficult, but a specific sum of money as a settlement would be required if you wanted me to quit the firm peacefully," Ryan remarked, tilting forward on the desk as though to aim at the executives in the room. But everyone there burst into wild laughter the following minute. Some were laughing so hard the corners of their eyes were weeping. Ryan was surprised by their response, rapidly blushing and sweating. In an attempt to calm him down, his attorney desperately attempted, but Jonathan eventually silenced them both by saying, "The reasons for firing are included in the dismissal notice, of course. I'll go over them with you now, and we can talk about any issues later." A group of individuals stepping up in black suits seated Ryan and his lawyer. They made a little bow and switched on the electronic whiteboard located in the middle of the conference room. Screenshots of sites displaying wine being sold on an internet marketplace which was imported specifically for restaurants with group participation, were shown on the screen right away. The screen then displayed a larger image of the emblem for the wine vendor. Ryan shot to his feet as soon as it materialized, yelling, "This isn't me!" Ryan's face became pale, and understandably so. The symbol was a cropped selfie of Ryan. The original images were neatly presented on the screen with a 100% image match rate shown in red. Turning to face the attorney, who was still not quite understanding the situation, one of the men in the black suits came up and identified themselves as the legal firm that the business had retained. Permit me to clarify the grounds for the notice of termination. The reasons he skillfully outlined were embezzlement, harassment, undue pressure at work based on your executive position, disclosure of confidential company information, unapproved absences, tardiness, laziness, and harming the company's reputation by misusing a company vehicle. He went on to say that the company's financial and legal divisions had been surreptitiously looking into reports that the wine, which was only intended to be sold in shops, was being swapped online. After locating the original account, they worked with the authorities and other pertinent parties to determine that it was connected to Ryan's internet banking account. The Inventory Management Division also discovered indications of duplicate books. After being questioned by many staff members, they admitted that Ryan had threatened to terminate them if they did not cooperate, forcing them to take part in the illegal activities. As this explanation unfolded, Ryan was sweating profusely. His complexion turned even paler as the next images were displayed. The video, which appeared to have been taken covertly using a cell phone, showed Ryan harassing and abusing female interns and temporary employees sexually. Ryan's attorney was waiting, mouth open, unable to take his eyes off the replaying film. The screen then showed pictures of client data meant for our business being transferred to a competitor. Along with an envelope with the legal counsel's name from the competing firm, there was also a USB disk with original recipes. Ryan's pale complexion turned ashen at this, and his hands trembled on the desk. Without holding back, our attorney went on to say that concerns had been raised concerning the source of this private information even before its usage. When the acquisition process was examined again, it was discovered that Ryan had provided the data to a competitor firm employee in exchange for a sizable payment. The competitor promptly resolved the employee's concerns and gave us back the information along with papers that made things clearer. Ryan's attorney, taken aback by the constant disclosures of Ryan's wrongdoings, listened in startled silence. While it may seem unnecessary to mention now, all of these illegal activities have already resulted in criminal complaints, our attorney said in closing. When it comes to settlement negotiations, you ought to be getting ready for a criminal defense. With a shivering laugh, he said this, making Ryan's attorney flush. My customer has not informed me of this at all. I am unable to represent him in this situation. He glared at Ryan and said, I resign, before storming out of the room. Ryan's initial arrogance disappeared when he was left alone, and he sagged in his chair. Before long, the women he had harassed in the video stood in front of him and said they would also be requesting damages. To make matters worse, our attorney went on, in addition, social media posts have verified that you have cheated on several women while utilizing business resources, including during working hours, and have participated in improper public behavior. Please be aware that the corporation will include these activities in its damages claims. Ryan finally fell out of his chair and sat on the floor, his eyes devoid of any grin and his demeanor one of despair. As Philip and the attorney had announced, Ryan's actions led to his prompt dismissal. During the subsequent inquiry, Ryan was questioned about embezzlement and attempted to settle in order to avoid going to jail. But he had trouble finding a lawyer who would take his case and even make the retainer payments. Eventually, Ryan managed to cover his lawyer fees and compensation payments using his inheritance, avoiding jail time for embezzlement. However, he struggled to address the compensation claims for leaking confidential information, the emotional damages claimed by the women he harassed, and the defamation lawsuits. Overwhelmed by debt, Ryan faced mounting financial troubles. Enraged that Ryan had promptly thrown her under the bus for his own safety, Katie sued for child support, damages, and asset split. Ryan responded by insisting that the infant get a DNA test, putting the paternity inquiry ahead of budgetary considerations. Katie was horrified to learn that the kid was not Ryan's biological child, despite agreeing to the test. Subsequent inquiries conducted by a detective employed by Ryan revealed that Katie had several lovers during their shotgun marriage, one of whom was the child's biological father. Despite this, John remained legally Ryan's kid, and Ryan was aware that he would have to pay child support. He began mediation to verify that there was no parental link, but a drawn-out settlement was expected. Katie's parents were very keen to prevent the public from learning about the details of her turbulent personal life throughout the legal proceedings. They became very angry and demanded that Katie cease embarrassing them and give up any claims she had for child support, damages, and asset partition. Katie took an unexpected turn when she insisted that Winston, her kid's biological father, acknowledge their relationship and provide child support. Winston, who was married, was afraid his wife would find out if he acknowledged the child formally. Katie was not happy with Winston's promise to pay child support, so she took the kid and confronted him at his house when he was away. She confidently said, "Don't you think it's terrible that your child and mine, sharing the same father, aren't acknowledged and get no proper child support?" As Katie dealt with a string of her own financial and emotional problems, Ryan, who was now deeply in debt and facing legal issues, found it difficult to recover. In the meantime, motivated by my colleagues' encouragement and support, I concentrated on reconstructing my own life and career. I'm 54 years old and have 11 years till I retire, so I want to make the most of my time. My objective is to demonstrate my growth and contributions, gain an extension of my retirement,